English 102 students, let's do a little bit of discussing a very famous part of Romeo and Juliet. This is a speech it's a poem. It's inside a scene. It's where the boys are going to the Capulet party. And Romeo has been basically saying maybe this is not a good idea. The boys, of course, the others are ready to go. They're excited to be going. Um, but Romeo a couple different times says this doesn't bode well. I don't feel right about this. And at one point in time, Mercutio just sort of turns around and says this, and it doesn't seem to come out of anywhere. But he, if you think about it psychologically, the people are talking. They're getting excited. Boys are going to a party. They're going to see girls there. They're getting excited, and Romeo is talking about dreams and where ideas come from that make him feel like this isn't right. And Mercutio sort of snaps out this kind of idea here that there's a fairy that comes in the night and crosses us in the sense of crosses us where our nose is, or crosses our head, and then makes us dream of things. And those dreams are inspirations for things, right? So I always look at them mostly as they are dreams, but as specifically they are passions and desires. And that helps us see that Mercutio is talking about how humans, or men, he basically says, get these ideas in their head, right? So he's going to go down the list. So, but it always reminds me of Cinderella's fairy godmother, that you have this fun idea of something that was in those people's world, which was a coach with horses that drew the coaches most of the time, a driver, and then sometimes footmen or others that would, sometimes they'd hang on the back and they would help people get in and out and move the luggage and stuff. Not every carriage or coach was actually the same, but this one always reminds me of how the pumpkin and everything is turned into the coach for Cinderella. Of course, this is 400 years ago, so I don't know if which of the writers might have taken anything from another writer. I don't think it's a completely brand new idea, this having a coach made of something else, right? It's a wonderful little metaphor. So I'm going to read part of it and then we'll talk about it. If you noticed, if you watch a film version of this, you often have Mercutio go from something that seems more fun but fairly calm maybe to a really upset state. Mercutio is often done this way because his name invites it. His name is Mercutio, which is similar to Mercury. Mercury's nicknames are changeable. When you call something mercurial, you mean it is changeable, and often you mean it can go toward passion and fire. Okay, you don't usually say changeable in the sense that it can get bummed out, but the range. So sometimes when you watch a performance of Mercutio, you'll realize that the director and maybe the actors decided to cast him maybe as something like having bipolar disorder. That he's manic and he's depressive at different moments, and if that's the way you play it in this scene, it happens very quickly. At the very end, Romeo seems to maybe get in there and get him to stop and try to explain to him that he's talking about nothing. Now that's it's a little bit of a smile in the sense that nothing is something small, and he's been talking about something super tiny, right? So not just Queen Mab, who's a fairy, that's super tiny to start with, but her coach and everything else are so tiny. And Romeo, when he tries to pull him out of this, talks about how you are speaking of stuff that is so tiny, it's actually nothing. Don't worry about it, right? Now it starts this way. Oh, then I see Queen Mab hath been with you. And the boys often then reply, Queen Mab, who is she, or whatever. And that's the intro that he gives to get it all started, right? He said, she is the fairy's midwife, and she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone on the forefinger of an alderman. Now, an agate stone is it's a stone of value, but it's not great value, right? It's small is what he's emphasizing, and it's on the forefinger of an alderman. An alderman would be someone like around the level of maybe a mayor, right? So he's not a rich landed nobleman or anything, but so it's an emphasis on something pretty small, right? It's going to get smaller as he describes how this goes together. So he says, drawn with a team of little atomies athwart men's noses as they lie asleep, her wagon spokes made of long spinners' legs, the cover of the wings of grasshoppers, the traces of the smallest spider's web. Okay, so atomies really actually is a word that means the tiniest things, right? That's why we have the word atom in science, right? So he's saying it's drawn by a team of these little tiny things, basically, right? A thwart, no, that means across men's noses as they lie asleep. So, right, across the noses of sleepers. Her wagon spokes. Okay, so this is the wheels of the wagons, and the spokes, they would be made of wood in this old days, right? And he says of spinner's legs. Now, spiders are often called spinners. And so the legs, it sounds like they're the legs of spiders. It says the cover of the wings of grasshoppers. And I think that's the coach, although maybe he's not said it yet. But think about how spiders, I'm sorry, not spiders' wings, but um, grasshoppers' wings are see-through, right? If you can see light through them, they have a transparency to them. So we're getting parts of the coach put together, right? The traces of the smallest spider's web. I forgot what traces mean. I think it's the wheels themselves, the outside of the wheel, the part that actually touches the ground, right? The collars of the moonshine's watery beams. The collars would usually be what the animal that's pulling, the collar goes on the animal that's pulling the coach. Her whip of cricket's bone, the lash of film. So imagine a whip, but the kind that is a stick, and then at the end is attached the things that are very flexible, right, or that whip around. And so that's what cricket's bone is, the stiff part, and then the lash of film is the tiny thing that sort of moves in the air, and we picture the movement of it. Her whip of cricket's bone, the lash of film. Her wagoner, a small gray-coated gnat. Now, wagoner here would be the driver, right? So a gnat, you know how small a gnat is, right? And imagine it wearing a gray coat. Not half so big as a round little worm. That doesn't tell you anything exactly because there's worms of so many different sizes, right? But it's all an emphasis on these things are tiny. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut. So I grew up with these nuts calling them filberts. That's what my mom called them, and I got used to them. So I put a little picture here for you. That's somebody's drawing of mab. There's no terrific drawing that I could find that really puts these elements together better. It's kind of a shame in a way. Back here it says, pricked from the lazy finger of a maid. Now, maid is an unmarried woman, so usually means a girl. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut made by the joiner squirrel or old grub. Now, a joiner is a carpenter. Is the one that puts wood joints together to make different things, right? And an old grub, I think that's mostly just an old man, basically, some old guy who's been around and done everything and stuff, right? It says, time out of mind, the fairies is coachmaker. So time out of mind, I think, means like since a long, long time ago, these are the ones that have been making the fairies coaches, right? So the joiner squirrel and the old grub. The next stanza, I've actually broken these just so we can see the way it's written in parts. These are not actually broken in the play, of course. And in this state, she gallops night by night through lovers' brains, and then they dream of love. That's the first note, right? So we see what she does. We see her rig, and then she starts to, drive at night and goes over people and inspires them with passions and desires. The first one is love itself. Now remember, she was called a midwife at the beginning, and midwife is someone who helps babies be born, or you can say helps a woman have her baby, right? So midwives fulfill that role. Now, I think then when it says through lovers' brains and then they dream of love, this is one of our first images of Mab is helping these things be born. They're born in the mind, born in the dream, however you'd like to say it, right? Or courtier's knees that dream on curtsies straight. Okay, so courtiers, they did more than one thing, right? But this idea that they're dreaming of curtsies, they could be dreaming of being in court where they are bowing down to somebody else, or they could be dreaming of having the attention paid to them, on getting people to, bow to them, right? Or lawyers' fingers who straight dream on fees. That's a classic anti-lawyer statement, right? That this is what lawyers dream of, making money, basically. Or ladies' lips who straight on kisses dream, which off the angry Mab with blisters plagues, because their breaths with sweetmeats tainted are. So why do these ladies have blisters on their lips? Well, sweetmeats are candies and anything sweet, actually, right? So anything like a candy, a little pastry or something. And so they could have a sickly sweet breath, but I think it's leaning towards something maybe a little bit more like venereal disease too. Is that these women who kiss a lot end up with blisters on their lips, right? So we think of herpes and things now, but they might not have thought of that by name back then, right? The next one says, sometimes she gallops o'er a courtier's nose, and then he dreams of smelling out a suit. And I think it's someone who, this is someone who wants to work in the court and wants to hang on to the king or to a duke or anybody else and be in the room with them and maybe be considered once in a while. And it was a position definitely not as grand as the main politician or nobleman, but someone who's in that room there and is sort of a famous or influential because of proximity, right? That sort of thing. Uh, and sometime comes she with a tithe pig's tail, tickling a parson's nose as he lies asleep. Then dreams he of another benefice. So a parson is a religious person in town, right? Now a tithe pig is just a pig, but it's a little pig that you would give to the church, basically, right? Now tithe is the idea that you give 10% of your income to the church. It's what was expected of so many people. And so that's what this pig is, right? It says tickling a parson's nose, and he dreams of getting another one of these donations, or he dreams of having somebody sort of like hire him to do a job, the kind of job he does, right? So sometimes people have never thought about this, but anytime a religious person conducts a wedding or conducts a funeral or many other things, they get a little bit of money for this, right? So Shakespeare is again talking about these people who really what they're dreaming of is money, and this is in Mercutio's attitude. He is not very well, he's not respectful of these other people. And all the way to the point of his death, he's still criticizing the way so many of these people live, right? Mercutio is definitely what's called an iconoclast. He's someone who will knock down the things that other people might say, oh, you should give respect to that. Mercutio is kind of like, why? Why should I? Look what they are. They're hypocrites and things like that. Now we get to the soldier part. This is when it starts to go from some of these things, which are maybe physically not so scary or violent or anything, directly to violence. Sometimes she driveth over a soldier's neck, and then dreams he of cutting foreign throats. So a soldier dreams of going to war and into battle, right? Of breaches, ambuscados, Spanish blades. So ambush is an old word for, I'm sorry, ambuscado is an old word, probably from the Spanish, right? For ambushes. So that's what the soldier is actually dreaming of. Of breaches. Breaches is when you break through a wall or a door or something and get into wherever you're attacking. Spanish blades, that's just because some of the Spanish blades were one of the most famous and respected types of swords and knife makers and stuff down in Spain. Of healths 5 fathoms deep, and then anon, and that's a weird print on that, right? 5 fathoms deep is a long way deep in the ocean. And then soon drums in his ear. So he's dreaming of fights and battles and things, and then eventually, it goes all the way to the point of drumming in his ears. And remember, drums are always associated with war, or not always, but a lot of the time. And then it wakes him up, and he's frightened. He's shocked awake in a way, and he swears to do something. He prays, and then he goes to sleep again. So I was like that point. Now, then Mercutio is going to tell us something's very different, but it's about Mab being a troublemaker. He says she plaits the manes of horses. So plaits means what we would call braid, right? And the manes, of course, horses have long hair up on the top back of their neck, and they can be braided by humans. And there's just always different traditions and different ways people like to do their horses. But it's also not uncommon to wake up in the morning and that hair is knotted up or tangled. There's a lot of different reasons this can happen. Some of them are just simply scientific, about everything from moisture in the air to the way the hair follicle is actually going to move around and twist. And so, in other words, by themselves, we now know that they can tangle themselves up. But Back then, it was probably more common for people to believe maybe something did it. And so in our modern world, we might say gremlins, right? But Mercutio is telling us it's actually Queen Mab who does this. It causes this kind of trouble. And they tangle it up in the night. And apparently there was a superstition to not untangle it. In other words, if the fairy creatures did this, you're supposed to leave it alone. So if you untangle it, you end up with bad luck. He then goes on to say, this is the hag when maids lie on their back. Now, maid is a virgin. That's just sort of the definition, right? Maid is an unmarried woman. An unmarried woman was supposed to always be a virgin. So when you see maid, it basically means virgin, right? So it says when maids lie on their back. So a young woman lies on her back so that a guy can climb on top of her for sex. Mercutio is telling us that Queen Mab is the one who actually gets this going, causes this to be, and then the lady lays down, the man is on top of her, and then she becomes pregnant. So she first has to bear the weight of the man on top of her, and then she's going to bear the weight of the baby inside of her, right? So that's why she's called a woman of good carriage, because they're going to be able to carry. That's the way that goes, right? This is she, and then often Mercutio needs to be interrupted, and he's very sort of excited at this point in time. And they calm down and they go on to the party, which, of course, eventually that night, something like Queen Mab happens because Romeo is completely smitten by Juliet. And he goes and talks to her afterwards, and she's completely smitten by him. And whether that's Queen Mab or natural chemistry that a very modern person might say, Mercutio is giving people this romantic vision of what causes that sort of thing. Okay, so I hope you like Queen Mab. It's one of a lot of people's favorite parts of Romeo and Juliet.